I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got the former Canadian ambassador to Israel, Vivian Bercovici. Is that correct? Vivian Bercovici in Israel today, in a kibbutz in southern Israel. She'll describe better exactly where she is. And she wants to talk to us today about what's going on in Israel. It's yesterday was Canadian Thanksgiving. Actually, I have to warn you that we're pre-taping this. So if things happen between our taping on Monday and when we broadcast this on Tuesday, we don't know because things are moving so quickly. But I think it's completely appropriate that on Canadian Thanksgiving we are thankful for the return of the hostages. And so I thought it'd be really helpful to check in with a former ambassador from Canada to Israel who's now living in Israel on a kibbutz. What's going on? Vivian, Ambassador Bercovici, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here with you. What's going on? Are you asking
What's
me?
going on?
Throwing
Yes.
that question out to the universe.
Both.
So much is going on. It's been just a wild, wild day. I mean, today's Monday. It's just over 2 weeks ago that the United Nations General Assembly had its big show and everybody came and so many of the Western countries were sort of, piling on Israel and saying they were ready to unconditionally recognize a Palestinian state, and Mahmoud Abbas would be the president of this new state. And our Prime Minister, of course, Mark Carney, was leading the pack, and it was a really shockingly not terribly carefully thought through initiative. And then Netanyahu made a speech on Friday to an empty hall because most countries walked out. And everything was horrible. Israel is being attacked left, right, and center, accused of things that frankly aren't true. And we now know in retrospect that President Trump just kind of sat back and looked at it and said, this is like a train wreck and it shouldn't be. And we're going to turn this around. And you'll recall that Israel had also, I believe it was the Tuesday before, maybe it was a week and a half before the UN week. It was September 9th, and the Israeli Air Force had bombed a house in an upper middle class neighborhood in Doha where Hamas leadership was meeting. And they were meeting on September 9th purportedly to discuss whether or not to release the hostages that remain in captivity. As you recall, they took close to 250 hostages from Israel of many different nationalities. And so on September 9th, there were still 28 bodies they were holding hostage. And it was believed they had 20 that were still alive. And so the U.S. had engaged in some pretty aggressive negotiating to try to get a deal to get these hostages out. And just as the deal was going to Hamas leadership in Doha to be considered, and they had come together, they were all kind of squirreled away in different parts of the Muslim Brotherhood world, so in Turkey and in Egypt, and they met in their sort of headquarters in Doha, Qatar. And Israel, the Israeli Air Force attacked. They missed the Hamas leadership. There were four other individuals, security guards, who were or bodyguards who were killed in that hit. But it enraged many countries, including Qatar, of course. And, one assumes that President Trump wasn't too pleased either. But Trump took that situation and looked at it and he said, we've got to fix this. We've got to turn it around. And, there's lots of speculation as to whether and how much that attack actually created leverage for Israel in the end, because it scared the Qataris for a number of reasons. I mean, this is the Middle East and power talks. So that was the situation. And immediately Trump pulled together his team. And his team is lean. He didn't go to the State Department and gather, hundreds of people to work on reports and submit analyses. He turned to his longtime friend and right-hand man, Steve Witkoff, who has a very successful career in real estate. And he has been President Trump's special envoy, negotiating peace agreements and all sorts of things around the world. And so he's been on the Middle East file from the beginning. And then he called his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who's also very active in the Middle East in terms of business, and who has very strong and deep relationships with leaders throughout the Middle East, everywhere. And there were others involved. And of course, there was an Israeli team. And Trump said, like, fix this. I want this done. I want the hostages out. I want them all out at once. He's famously noted with sneering contempt that, he says, I don't, just a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, he said, I want them all out at once. I don't want two here and three there and four here. I don't want these dribs and drabs. I want them all out at once. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. Let's get the hostages out and then we're going to make peace. And I mean, he floated it, a while ago, probably a year ago. Remember the big Gaza? He was going to build a mall and it was going to glitter and right. This was a much more serious effort. And, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are very serious people. And the bottom line is, in just over a week, they pulled together a very serious peace proposal, which President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu presented to the world about 10 days after he said this has to be fixed at a press conference at the White House. It was a 21-point peace plan then, and I think it's down to 20 now. And there are phases. And the first phase was non-negotiable for Trump. He said, all the hostages come out, period, all at once. Like, I'm not negotiating that. And then you let the hostages out, then Israel will let out, prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, and then we're going to take it from there. But what they did in that plan was they really set out very thoughtful proposals that can serve as a framework to move forward and establish normal relations. Doesn't mean everybody's going to love each other, but just stop all these horrible wars and attacks. And in order to do that, what Witkoff and Jared Kushner had to do, they spoke to the Qataris, they spoke to Egypt, they spoke to Israel, they spoke to Turkey, they spoke to Saudi Arabia, they spoke to the United Arab Emirates, and others, I'm sure. But those are the main players. You cannot pretend that you are going to, in any meaningful way, advance or promote peace in this very complex region if you don't speak to all of the major players. Love them or hate them, they're there. And I mean, one of the things that stands out so boldly is, you'll probably recall, in that same period of time, Prime Minister Carney actually took the lead. He likes taking the lead in foreign policy things, whether he actually understands the issues or not. But he always puts himself out in front of Macron and Starmer, this little kind of troika they've formed. And whatever they say, he always likes to take it a step further. And what he did, and what really kind of came to fruition in that same week that Trump said this is a disaster, we've got to fix it, was Carney worked hard to convince many Western liberal countries to recognize the state of Palestine unconditionally, as I mentioned earlier. And they preemptively crowned Mahmoud Abbas the leader of this newly formed state. And Carney, the end of July, issued like a 2 or 3 paragraph statement. It was like basically, okay, I spoke to Abbas for an hour. We talked through everything. We understand the conditions. So problem solved. Um, and it was just astonishing that his office would even let him do it. Never mind that he would do that. Mahmoud Abbas is 89 years old. He's a multi-billionaire. He is loathed by the Palestinians in the West Bank, where Hamas is twice as popular as his party. He has no currency, power, profile, credibility in the Gaza Strip. And for some reason, the Prime Minister of Canada decided that this man should lead this state and that problem solved. Hamas, it didn't matter. We were going to demilitarize it, and they were just going to kind of, I guess, ride off into the sunset, and we'll get to the details later. We'll let someone else do that. So the contrast between these two kind of movements or efforts couldn't be more stark. And when Macron attended was at the White House recently and sat down with Trump, and he sort of got, publicly spanked by Trump for that stupid initiative. I don't think that Carney took that one on the chin publicly, but I expect he probably heard a word or two behind closed doors about that. Because it also is interesting to note that Prime Minister Carney has changed his schedule at the last minute and is rushing off to Sharm el-Sheikh to be present for the signing of this peace plan, which one would think he might not support, given that it is quite different from everything that he proposed. So we've had a very dramatic, I care about Canada more than most people in Israel, obviously, but we've had a very dramatic 2 weeks. And what the Trump team did was they said, this is fundamentally a Middle Eastern issue. Yes, there are other superpowers involved and there are always other interests. But you know what? We're not even going to talk to the Europeans about this. Like, they were relevant in the Middle East maybe 100 years ago. Remember, they carved up the Middle East in 1919. It's like, okay, the Lebanese are like, we'll take chunks of Syria and Lebanon, and okay, Britain, you can take, Jordan and, well, mandatory Palestine. And they had their moment, and now it's America's moment. And his approach is very different. He's saying, no, I'm going to talk to the people in the neighborhood. I'm going to get their input. I'm going to get their buy-in. And the Europeans are falling into line pretty quickly. It's amazing.
What an incredible couple of weeks. We're chatting tonight with former Ambassador Vivian Bercovici, who is former Canadian ambassador to Israel, now currently living on a kibbutz in Israel, about what's gone on in the last couple of weeks. We're going to take a break for some messages, and when we come back in 2 minutes, I'm going to ask her how she and her family and her friends reacted to the release of the hostages. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Just a real honor tonight to be chatting with former Ambassador Vivian Bercovici, who is a former Canadian ambassador to Israel. She currently now lives in Israel on a kibbutz. She's obviously incredibly aware of, involved in, and now commentating on what's been going on in Israel, in the Middle East for the last couple of years, but particularly for the last couple of weeks is what we want to chat with her about. But right now, I want to chat about the last couple of hours. Vivian, how did you react to the return of hostages?
I think that the whole country's sort of in shock. We've been waiting for this for a very, very long time. You know, President Trump has said, and anybody who's familiar with kind of the way these situations tend to pan out, that the hostages at the end are going to be the toughest ones to get out because they're such an important asset and leverage, especially for a group like Hamas. And the 20 living hostages that were released today are all men. They were all considered to be soldiers by Hamas because they were of military age, i.e., eligible to serve. One actually wasn't, he was too old, but they decided that he was. And so they treated them as soldiers. And they were held in exceptionally harsh, brutal conditions. They were tortured, they were shackled. We know this from hostages that have been released and given testimony. And we've also seen horrific psychological torture videos that Hamas has released that do torture people who care about humanity. And the prospect of these people being released alive was really, really dim. And then all of a sudden, we have this like really quick peace proposal agreement that's negotiated. I mean, it's not months and years. It's like, boom, 10 days, Trump is on it. It's done. Everyone's signed off. And holy cow, what? So from within 72 hours of sign off, they're going to be released? I mean, that can't be real. That's just not how things work here. The thing with President Trump is, he's feared by everyone in the Middle East, including Netanyahu, I think, because he doesn't bluff and he is smart and he sizes up a situation pretty quickly. His skill set may be more suited to the Middle East, which is pretty rough and tumble than North America sometimes, but it worked. And so it was signed officially by everyone on Friday, and the 72 hours were up at noon today. So we were all prepared for, Hamas to play games and to delay because they always do stuff like that. And then last night, late, the IDF confirmed, yep, the release is going ahead. As you mentioned, I live in southern Israel, so I'm not, too far from the area. Close to Gaza, not right on the border, but not so far. And so I said, what the heck? I'm going to go over. I want to be there. I want to be there when the convoy comes, when they're released. And it was just an extraordinary experience. I was there. It was still kind of dark when I arrived. The roads were lined, thousands and thousands, probably tens of thousands of people. Everybody knows the route that the hostage convoy is going to take, so they can position themselves accordingly. All ages, there are children, there are older people, everybody's there. You can't shield children from what has happened because many of them were witness. They lived in these places that Hamas invaded. Many of them were taken hostage. They know many people who were slaughtered. They've seen the carnage. So handling children in a place like this is difficult, but we can't pretend it's not happening. So it was just extraordinary. I mean, people were upbeat and excited, and nobody could let themselves believe this is actually going to happen until we see it with our eyes. And on the other hand, it's also a day when we remember very sharply that there are many people who were murdered that day, many people who have died since, close to 1,000 soldiers. I think about 600 or 700 of them since that day. So it's, like everything in this country tends to be, it's kind of, we got the yin and then you got the yang, right? We've always got the tension pulling. I was there. I mean, I have a media pass, so I was on like the media side of the street, which was kind of cool because you get a much better kind of view of everything that's going on, and a lot of action, a lot of military police, a lot of regular police, but very chill. Like no, nothing aggressive, nothing violent. It's just like, guys, we got to keep the road clear so that when they come, but we all know, you live here, long enough, and you learn the signs of when they're coming. You just know. And it was very suspenseful. It took about, I think the convoy actually came through. I didn't look at my watch. I mean, you just don't. You're just completely in the moment. It was something like 9:30, 9:45. Um, and it was a long convoy. And at the beginning and the end, you had those like, superhero kind of, elite forces guys securing the front and the end, and then other military ahead and behind them. And in the middle, I can't remember how many there were, two or three vans, with tinted windows, where eight, I believe, of the men came out in the first release, and the others came later. And they drove through the crowd slowly because these men have been in tunnels and so tormented for 2 years. They haven't seen daylight. They've been, as I mentioned, they've been tortured, they've been humiliated, they've been starved. And, in a period of hours, they emerge from the tunnels, they put on different clothes, they're put in vehicles, and they're leaving Gaza after 2 years. And I think that what everybody, and myself included, wanted to do was be a part of it in a real way, see them come out and let them know how much we worked to have them released, how hard we all worked. We never stopped. And it's really important. I mean, this is a very small country and everybody knows everybody. My daughter was at what we call Hostage Square now, which used to be a big, beautiful plaza where, there's an opera house and a theater and a big art museum. And for the last 2 years, it's turned into this kind of gathering place for the hostage families, but also for just people who want to go. And it's where we have Saturday night rallies and all kinds of support activities. And she was there today, and it was just wild, just jammed with tens of thousands of people. And again, this kind of the joy, the grief, when the men finish at the army base. So I was just outside the base where they go in, they shower, they clean up, they see their families for the first time in 2 years, and then they get a preliminary medical assessment, and then they're all taken by helicopter to one of three hospitals in Tel Aviv. It's like a 15-minute helicopter ride. And the helicopters, they leave this area near the Gaza Strip in Israel, and they always fly over Hostage Square when they're bringing hostages home, and they can wave down to the crowds. And, the crowds see this, and it's so important. And every single hostage has said it just blows them away. Many of them have no idea that we've been fighting for them.
How could
So
they?
well, some of them were now and then exposed to television. Some of them have stories about how their guards would tell them things, like Israel's falling apart, and they would tell them all kinds of things, and they would in that mention that there are these demonstrations and protests, but they couldn't trust what the guards were telling them, right? Like they knew that there's a lot of psychological manipulation going on. But some of them did have access to television now and then, and some of them speak and understand Arabic. A lot of Israelis, Arabic is their first language, Jews and non-Jews. So, there were a few guys who spoke and understood Arabic, and so they could listen in when the guards were talking about stuff. So they
What
kind of
what
learned that way.
what do you think their next their next few days will be filled with?
The hostages,
Yes.
Hamas. Um, Look, these guys, they're 20 now. They're all back. I think the last ones are kind of being checked out and moved to hospital. It's pretty clear they're in pretty rough shape, a lot of them. Hamas clearly fed them for the last few weeks, knowing that this release might actually happen, because we've seen videos of them previously, and they were literally skin and bone. And they've sent others out really on the verge of death from starvation. So at least they've been eating better. They're going to be going through some really intense medical and mental health assessments. Some of them we know have quite serious injuries, both from October 7th that weren't treated and also subsequently from torture. One soldier in particular, he's apparently covered in burns because they enjoyed torturing him with electric shocks. And he was singled out for special treatment. He was actually pulled unconscious from the tank where he was serving from inside the tank. And there's really horrible video footage of that. So there are lots of, I think that this group, more than the previous groups that have been released, they all have some kind of physical injury. I think every one of them, some more, some less severe. One young man has lost the sight in one eye, might lose the sight in another eye. Many of them have very serious shrapnel wounds, head injuries from being beaten as they were taken into Gaza. And then there's the damage of malnutrition, no exposure to light for 2 years, the psychological suffering and torture, not being able to stand up, not being able to move, muscle atrophy, so many things. I mean, long-term organ damage is something that we know even previous hostages who were released suffer from, and what the long-term effects are of that, nobody knows. You know, when you receive no food other than one pita bread a day, not only do you lose a lot of weight and muscle mass, but your body can't function normally. So they're going to be going through the medical stuff, and then like they're going to be, I mean, some of these guys, they have very young children. One of the hostages released today, his son's now 5. He was 3. Another father has twin 5-year-old girls who were also taken hostage with their mother. And they were released in November 2023. But one of the girls was taken from her mother and her other sister as soon as they entered Gaza. And they were reunited sometime later. But I mean, who does that to a 3-year-old child? So each family has its story. But there are other young fathers too, fathers with very young children, who are coming back. And I think that it's obvious that some of them are in serious mental distress. Forget physical, but mental.
It's
It's
just
a tough road for it's going to be a tough road for all of them. Tough
tell
road.
me what you think is going to be the reaction to the hostages that come back dead. What's that gonna be like?
It's hard. I think that all of us kind of, as we were rejoicing today, seeing these guys come out, we all think, but there are those who are left behind, and there are many who were also killed and their bodies were released earlier, murdered, actually. Among them, a mother and her 4-year-old son and 9-month-old baby. They were kidnapped from one of the kibbutzim, and they were murdered by strangulation 1 month after they were taken. Their bodies were eventually returned. I think that first of all, right before we started speaking today and started doing this interview, I was online catching up, and Hamas has 28 bodies, and they had indicated to the negotiators that they might have difficulty locating all of them. Israel tends not to believe it when they say things like that, because Hamas says things like that all the time. And, oh, wow, look, we found them. It's a bit of a ploy. Having said that, they returned 4 bodies today, apparently, out of 28. So that's not going down very well. Um, it was anticipated that there may be some bodies missing, but not 24. So this is going to turn into something hugely problematic. And all of the parties are meeting tomorrow in Sharm el-Sheikh, so I'm sure it will be dealt with quickly. But it is interesting. There were two issues that President Trump anticipated, and frankly, in my view, quite brilliantly. Number one is the redevelopment of Gaza. He says, great, we're going to work through these things and we're going to have lots of problems. We all know that. But you have a magnificent opportunity to build a beautiful country here. You can build a Singapore, and they can. But you got to start building a society and institutions and not tunnels and weapons. And he looked to the other countries in the region, Qatar, Saudi, UAE, Egypt, and Turkey. And he said this in his remarks at the press conference and in a subsequent speech, I think. He said, we're not paying for it. America's not paying for this. You always come to America and Europe and ask us to foot the bill. It's not our bill. You guys have created so much of this problem. You've enabled the Muslim Brotherhood, which is Hamas, and you're going to pay. And you know what? Qatar, Saudi, UAE, you're very wealthy countries. You have the money. Egypt, Turkey, not as much, but you're still going to contribute. So that was one very clever thing that he did. And the other was in anticipation of these bodies that are not being located. It's a provision in this agreement that if they're not located, I guess it's not strictly spelled out what the timeframes are, but that'll be sorted out in the very near future, I think. If the bodies are not found, the Qataris, the Turks, and the Egyptians will go in and find them. And Israel and America will oversee that effort. So, in other words, you encouraged this, you applauded it, which they did, especially Turkey and Qatar. They celebrated October 7th. So, you're going to go in and do the dirty work. You're going to clean up the mess. And I thought, he's right. They should.
The devastation in Gaza of buildings, of infrastructure, hospitals, schools, roads, everything of the people. How can you ever rebuild that society? How can you ever rebuild that and make it a country? It's not a country today, but make it a country.
Well, it never was a country. So first of all, it's horrific. I've been inside Gaza, and I'm sure you've seen some photos and drone shots or aerial shots, and it's just a sea of rubble, and it's horrific. I can often hear, over the last 2 years, I've often been able to hear from my house. My house will shake when things are going on there. And from the day this happened, October 7th, first of all, keep in mind, Trump, in his comments today in the Knesset, used very strong language about the depravity, the cruelty, the unspeakable acts of violence. Much of the world likes to deny and pretend it didn't happen, or if it did happen, we deserved it. What went down was truly horrific. So there was a war that was started. They could have returned all of the hostages the next day. But they didn't, because Hamas adheres to a Muslim Brotherhood ideology, and that ideology calls for the annihilation of Israel and the murder of all Jews. That's not me. It's in their literature. It's in the Hamas charter. And it's what people are saying on the streets of Toronto and Montreal and many other places in Canada every day. And law enforcement seems to find it all fine and dandy. So to build a society, I mean, when you look at nation building, historically, it comes from the people. And nation building begins with the building of institutions. the sorts of things that communities need, schools, hospitals, libraries, the simple stuff of life. And so you raise the issue, well, things are destroyed in Gaza. And that's absolutely right. And unfortunately, a lot of that is because of the manner in which Western governments, including Canada and the United Nations, chose to support and embolden terrorism. So if you take a very serious look and study UNRWA, which we call, that's the acronym, but United Nations Relief Works Agency. It was established, I think, initially in 49 or 50 to address the issues of Palestinian refugees as a result of the 1948 war. Now, note that UNRWA does not address the issues arising from the forced expulsion from Middle Eastern countries of 750,000 Jews, expulsion and expropriation. So it was like, yeah, whatever, you guys, we don't care about you so much, but UNRWA is going to look after Palestinian refugees. That in and of itself tells you a lot because there is another United Nations body, I can't remember the full name, sorry, but it's a body that deals with refugee issues all over the world, everywhere, but not Palestinians. So you have to ask the question why. And then you have to look at what UNRWA does. What goes on in schools that are run by UNRWA? How many shafts leading to tunnels were found in UNRWA schools? Or I'll rephrase that. Is there a single UNRWA school in the Gaza Strip that did not have a tunnel shaft? That did not have weapons stashed? Then pull out their school books. Have a look at what they're teaching. They are teaching fascist, Islamist, extremist ideology.
Given what you've
And that's in the
described,
curriculum. And that's school. That's just one part of the society. Hospitals are a whole other thing. And so this is part of also of what the US has been trying to do, and Israel, is to cut UNRWA out of, no bad pun intended, the food chain. So food
given
distribution.
given what you've described, given October 7th, given the treatment of the hostages, given the devastation in Gaza, given how horrific October 7th was, everything that's gone on, how can there be peace? How can there actually ever be peace?
Well, I think there can. But what it turns on more than anything is the willingness of Qatar, in my view, and Turkey to support the necessary initiatives. And I say that because those are two countries that quite openly adhere to a Muslim Brotherhood ideology. They're Islamist countries. And I think that they have to decide, again, of course, Turkey is a NATO ally and Qatar is an American ally militarily in another way. So it all gets a little kind of weird and messy, but they have to decide how far they want to carry these principles. Now, if they decide that we really do want to participate in the more civilized world, and keep in mind too, it's not just, me sitting in Israel saying this about Qatar. The Gulf states, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, they hate Qatar. Okay, there's a lot of enmity there, and they hate Qatar because they are fundamentalists and they threaten stability in the region. Qatar in one way, Iran in another way. But if they're prepared to say, you know what, we want to live in peace. We don't want to promote this kind of Islamist. It is theofascism. Well, the best example that I think we all need to look at is what happened in post-war Germany. You have a Marshall Plan. The Western powers, led by America, go into Germany, and they're most effective, of course, in the West because the East becomes the domain of the Soviet Empire. But there was a very focused and concerted denazification process. That's what it's called. And they had to get into the guts of everything in that society.
But that
And
was based on an unconditional surrender. This is not an unconditional surrender, is it?
no, no, it's not. But it might be. I mean, I think that this is, again, you put your finger right on one of the huge problems here is Hamas is still standing. And Hamas can't stay standing. So this is exactly where Netanyahu wanted to go with the war, and I think most Israelis would have supported that, except for the hostages. So now the hostages are out, meaning that Hamas has relinquished significant leverage. They still have bodies, though, so they do have that leverage. But the living hostages are out. And we know that they have arms, and we know they're already fighting for control in the areas that Israel's withdrawn from in the last few days. So there are already battles between, family clans that hate Hamas and Hamas. Nothing to do with us. Hamas has to be disarmed. And that's part of what the other thing that this plan contemplates is appointing what Trump calls the Board of Peace. And Sir Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of the UK, has expressed strong interest in running this Board of Peace and the day to day. Trump would be the chair. And that signals to everyone in the region, I'm serious, I'm keeping an eye on this. Don't mess around. And everyone's made clear to Hamas, if you do not work with us, Israel's going to come back in and finish the job. Like, we're not going to let you stay standing. We're not going to let you build up what you built, a terror state in our living room, never mind on our front porch. So you're right. It wasn't an unconditional surrender. We're not dealing with a conventional enemy. We're dealing with a terror organization. No rules apply to them. And that's where it becomes really incumbent on Qatar because Qatar finances Hamas. They provide a home base for their leadership. They have the leverage and they've got to use it.
We're going to take a final break, and come back with some concluding comments with our guest, former Canadian Ambassador Vivian Bercovici, to Canadian Ambassador to Israel in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Fascinating conversation today with former Canadian Ambassador to Israel, Vivian Bercovici. Ambassador, you spent 20 years in law in Toronto. You graduated from the University of Toronto in 1988. You were appointed by Stephen Harper, the former Prime Minister of Canada, to be the Canadian Ambassador to Israel. Why are you living in a kibbutz in Israel today?
Um, I was a political, I've practiced for 24 years, actually, practiced law in Toronto. When the Prime Minister asked me to consider the appointment, which of course I was honored to accept, I came. I had anticipated serving longer. The change of government changed that. And usually, when you are appointed by a different party, because we have politically appointed ambassadors with every government, the protocol and the practice has always been that the incumbent is allowed to serve out their term. But Prime Minister Trudeau and his office decided to change that with me for reasons they can explain. So at that point, though, I had been here for 2.5 years. My younger daughter had come with me. She doesn't adjust overly easily. She was just finding her way, very happy. I was happy. Things had kind of ended abruptly and much sooner than I had expected. And it was like, well, let's stay here, right? I mean, I had more opportunity here professionally at that time and still do than I would in Toronto. We were really enjoying living in a climate that doesn't have a lot of winter. And so it was purely that kind of personal reason. And then on top of that, Israel is a beautiful country and it's fascinating. It's complicated. There's lots of conflict, but there's a tremendous intellectual energy here that I have not ever experienced anywhere else.
With what's gone on in the last 2 years and the last 2 days, 2 weeks,
Yeah, yeah.
are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? What do you think?
Well, we just keep putting one foot in front of the other. If you know, it's amazing every day. And I know this from when I was in office, and I used to obviously have access to much more and more detailed information about security related issues. And I remember just kind of being shocked the first couple of months I was here, realizing it's a miracle every day that this country functions at all normally. And it functions even better than normally. So I'm still here. I'm still standing. I live each day hard and I enjoy it. And I'm working hard along with people who are like-minded to affect the kinds of change in this country that I think we need. If that's optimistic, then I'm optimistic. I think I'm pretty pragmatic and realistic. Um, but if I look around here today and I look at what's going on geopolitically, both in the region and in Europe and in North America, I hate to say this, but I'm a lot more optimistic about the future here than I am in Canada. And I spend a lot of time in Canada still, lots of family, friends, very involved in many parts of society.
Well, we'll have to have you back on the show for a conversation about that. That sounds fascinating. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing what's gone on and what you think about it. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from a kibbutz in Israel at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.